As the 16th Grand Prix in this game, the Propeller power-up makes perfect sense. Up until this point, every single 2D mainline Mario game has gotten some form of representation. This is of course assuming that you view the Yoshi egg as part of Super Mario World. But basically, with the Turnip Cup being added in the last one, Super Mario Bros. 1, 2, 3, and World are taken care of. Naturally, the next pick would be the new Super Mario Bros. Series. It'd be easy enough for me to say that the Propeller is the most obvious one to choose, but I don't like taking the easy way out on these things. Plus, as much as I enjoy theorizing about this stuff, sometimes things just line up and it makes more sense to me than I thought it would. And this is one of those moments. The new Super Mario Bros. Franchise is made up of 4 games. While there are a lot of power-ups over these 4 games, if you remove the derivatives like the different types of mushrooms or the ice flower, you end up only really having a few choices remaining. For obvious reasons, they skipped the blue shell, which means there is nothing from New Super Mario Bros. DS to pick. The only 2 things that might make the cut in the Wii version would be the Propeller mushroom or the penguin suit. I just don't see penguin suit or penguin cup as being the right choice. And neither did Nintendo seemingly. New Super Mario Bros. 2 doesn't really have anything to offer either, so you can skip right past that one. And finally, when you get to New Super U, the Super Acorn is the only logical choice, unless you wanted to do the Super Crown as well. But I'm not fairly confident about the Crown being a good choice, and again, seemingly neither was Nintendo. The Propeller Mushroom does show up again in Super Mario Bros. U, and the Propeller Mushroom is more iconic than the Super Acorn. Then it makes full sense to me that they decided to go with that first and leave the Super Acorn for later. My point being is that somebody clearly put in a lot of thought about which power-ups to take from the new Super Mario Bros. Series, and that's why we're going over the Propeller Cup today. I think the Propeller Cup is unique because it was the first one to have a new course that was made for it specifically, rather than being brought over from Tour. Although I think it released on both games at the same time, or maybe it was Mario Kart 8 Deluxe slightly before Tour. Also, we've been so Tour and retro heavy that even if there was an asterisk by this one, I'd say it's a good thing. Here's a quick reminder of what I'm doing, how I'm doing it. Playlist is in the description if you want to watch the past videos. Link to the Patreon is also in the description if you want to watch the future videos that are already done. There's the chat on the Patreon that free members do have access to. Feel free to jump in on that if you'd like. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Propeller Cup. The first track is Sydney's Sprint Scene from Tour. The second track is the Game Boy Advance's Snowland. The third track is Mushroom Gorge from the Nintendo Wii. And the final track is the brand new Sky High Sundae. Sydney's Sprint, I think, is a prime example of what's wrong with having all of these tour tracks. I don't really have an affinity towards Sydney like I do some of the other city courses in this game, but playing through the Sydney track feels very different than playing through all of the other courses before it. And that's because this one does not feel like the typical tour track for me. And I think that's problematic because if this was not labeled as a tour track, I think it would be a lot more appreciated. Which for me is more of an issue with the tour tracks than the tour tracks themselves. People shrug these things off because they don't know which one's which, but some of them have a lot of thought and care put into them. It's kinda sad because I make the same mistake all the time. I don't know which one's which. Obviously I know the landmarks, but if I wasn't sitting down and heavily analyzing these, and someone asked me which one my favorite tour track was, I'd probably say something along the lines of, oh, the one with the soccer field, or the one with the Womps. But that being said, I know which ones I love when I play them, and this is one that I love. Sydney gets itself 3 points. Next up is the Game Boy Advance's Snowland. This one tends to get a lot of hate, and at first I was thinking it was just typical hate that all of these Game Boy Advance and Super Nintendo courses get, but then I realized that this is kind of boring. It's not so boring that I would go out of my way to give it 0 points, but it's like Toad Circuit boring. I know it's from the Super Nintendo, but I gave Mario Circuit 1 in the previous Grand Prix 3 points, but when I played that track, it feels competitive. The way this one is designed doesn't. I'm not saying you can't have any fun on it, I just think that it's overall very simple. It's also a lot simpler than the Sydney track, so we can take away the difficulty point for this Grand Prix as well. When I gave Wii Coconut Mall a single point, I told you guys there would be some Wii tracks that I will undoubtedly be giving 3 points to, largely because of nostalgia. This is one of them. So it's actually not entirely because of nostalgia. The track in general is pretty simple, but I think the segments where you're bouncing on mushrooms are unique and fun enough to go through that alone makes it worth 3 points. Everything else in the track is pretty simple. Although my hot take is that I think 200cc Mushroom Gorge is the funnest way to play Mushroom Gorge. And that's because you have to actually carefully time how fast you're going on the mushrooms. Because otherwise the bouncing gimmick will be nothing more than a spectacle. but let's give it the 3 points and move on. It may not seem like it on the surface, but Sky High Sundae is somewhat of a variation or evolution of Baby Park in the same way Excitebike was. I'm guessing most people didn't realize how simple the map on this one was until way later, because when you play through it, it doesn't feel that simple. Now obviously this track is going to get bonus points for me because I love the Sweets theme, even if this is the second track in the game like that, but I feel like many people are way too harsh on this one. I don't think that was always the case. When it first dropped, many liked it. But it seems like on more and more rankings and reviews, people just point out the map layout on this one. But for me, that whole idea doesn't really make sense because there is almost no straight segment on this. None of these lines are actually lines. You're either making a jump off of one ramp to another, being forced on the fly to choose which path you want to take with a quick fork up ahead. Even on the drifts, there's no railing and you can quickly fall off. I've heard people say this one is too easy. I don't think I can agree with that. Don't get me wrong, I do think this is an easy track, but too easy? That's kind of pushing it. This is actually one of the most dynamic courses in the booster pass so far, with seldom a moment where you can just drive comfortably forward knowing you'd be safe. And it's not only a track that I like, it's a track that I love. I enjoy this one. I enjoy going out of my way to pick it. And even if it was as simple as many people claim it was, this takes the whole idea of what makes Baby Park and Excitebike fun and just adds onto it in my opinion. The difference is that Baby Park is probably way too simple, but Sky High Sundae and Excitebike are two very enjoyable tracks that I think are wrongly judged because of their map layout. Of course, at the end of the day, this is all subjective. I don't think there's a right or wrong opinion. I just know that, in my opinion, it's 3 points. That being said, I will say that I think this Grand Prix might be one of the easiest Grand Prix in the entire game. For all intents and purposes, Sydney Sprint might actually be the most difficult track here. Or you might have a three-way tie between Sydney Sprint, Mushroom Gorge, and Sky High Sundae. None of these tracks are too easy in my opinion, except for the Snowland level. But overall, I think all of these would make good opening or second courses in any Grand Prix. Which is why I think the Propeller Cup is one of the easiest Grand Prix in the game, and might be the easiest one I've covered so far. Easiness doesn't make it bad, easiness doesn't even make it not good. But it's just an observation that's worth pointing out. And it's not lost upon me that the first cup that is represented by the new Super Mario Bros. Series is the Grand Prix that I'm saying is potentially the easiest one in the game. Actually, I think that's kind of hilarious and very fitting. I wonder if the Propeller Cup is even liked by many. It might get a little bit of a bump because of Mushroom Gorge, but I don't know if the rest of the tracks are necessarily anybody's top 20 or 50 even. And when you wrap those up and tie them in with Sky High Sundae, I can see people avoiding this one because they don't like Sky High Sundae. And this is purely speculation on my part, but I think a lot of people don't like it because it was built from the ground up for Mario Kart 8, or so we thought. But when we play it, it does not feel like a Mario Kart 8 course, it feels like a Mario Kart Tour track. And I'm imagining most people would prefer just having a retro track than having a tour track brought in. Especially when you try to compare the track side by side with some of the base game stuff, which undoubtedly got more love and more attention put into it when it was being made. So I wonder if somebody that might have otherwise seen Sky High Sundae as a 7 out of 10 track was so bothered by all of this that they made it a 4 or 5 out of 10. Not sure, and like I said, this is all speculation, but I genuinely don't think Sky High Sundae is all that bad. And I mean, that should be obvious because I gave it 3 points. I really enjoy this one, and I pick it often when we're playing online. But let's quickly tally this up. The first track in the Propeller Cup, Sydney Sprint Scene from Mario Kart Tour, earned itself the full 3 points. Snowman Land from the Game Boy Advance got itself 1 point. The Nintendo Wii's Mushroom Gorge earns the full 3 points. Admittedly, some of that might be because of nostalgia, but that's besides the point. And finally, for me at least, Sky High Sundae is a very good track, and I think it earns 3 points as well. As far as the diversity, I think the aesthetics do a good job differentiating themselves from one another, and I think you'd be hard-pressed to mix up any of the 2 tracks in this. But I will say that 3 of the tracks on here give that simple loop feel, where there aren't many segments that cross over and you're just going in a giant loop effectively, forcing players to rely more on the stage gimmicks rather than the actual layouts. That's not a bad thing, but because it's in multiple tracks, I feel like that I have to give this one 2 points instead of 3, which means the Propeller Cup is going to be topped off at 12 points. It's actually a lot better than I expected it would do, and I think that's because I didn't realize how good Sydney Sprint was until I started analyzing it. Which goes back to what I was saying in the beginning. All of these different city tracks' biggest flaw is the fact that they're known as city tracks, and hard to remember which one is which. I'm guessing the average person is not writing down which one is their favorite. I know I wasn't, and I didn't know which one I liked and which one I hated until I would start the race. But hopefully, after this is all said and done, that will no longer be an issue for me. We'll see in the next segment. That one contains London Loop. We'll be analyzing the entirety of the Rock Cup.